Good morning. We look today at Jeremiah 34 through 36. And I just want to share my sympathies publicly to Russ Baker and his family. It's never easy to have your dad pass away, but you are in my prayers and in my thoughts. And I know that God will give you his grace each and every day. Chapter 34 begins. Says the word of the Lord the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. And I noted that because, most often, like up in verse 19 of chapter 33, it says, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. And here it's the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. It really says the same thing, but, it's written a little bit differently. And it just, it just made me think a little bit more about how God was speaking to Jeremiah, giving Jeremiah the words to speak, the prophecy to come with, and the warnings to the people, but also within those warnings was an invitation and the reminder of God's faithfulness and of God's being with the people in and through all times. But the word that came to Jeremiah, again, was more warning about the devastation coming, the conquering that King Nebuchadnezzar would have over Jerusalem and all of Israel, all of Judah. And, he says, I'm going to give this city into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he will burn it with fire. And as we read on down through, like verse 6 and 7, the army of the king of Babylon was fighting against Jerusalem, and only two other cities were left, Lachish and Azekah. Other than that, there were three fortified cities that were left, that King Nebuchadnezzar had not yet conquered, but yet they were all going to be given over into the hand of the king because of Israel's unfaithfulness. In verse 8, the word came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Again, it's from the Lord. It isn't the word of the Lord came. It's just, that little bit of difference. It says, that all of the Hebrews, all of the Israelites should set free all of their male and female slaves, especially the Hebrew female slaves, and so that there would not be any of them held in slavery that way when this invading king came and stuff. But and so they did. It says they all set them free, but afterward they took them back again. It was kind of like, well, I'll set you free for a day or two, but then they're coming back. And so this, previously God had declared this year of Jubilee, or Jubilee year, every seventh year. Excuse me, those who were slaves were to be set free. The debts were to be considered paid. And every seventh year of 7 years, so every 49 years, then there would be an even bigger forgiveness, where any land that might have been forfeited or sold or whatever would return again. So it's talking about, the Jubilee year, and verse 14 points that out. And God says through Jeremiah in verse 14, but your ancestors did not listen. And then 15, you recently listened, but then you turned back. You turned around. And I thought about that. I underlined turned around. And I thought, how many times do we do that? How many times do we turn around in our promises to God and our promises to ourselves? And how many times do we say, man, I'm not going to do that anymore? And then we find ourselves doing it again. It's so hard to follow, to stay on the straight and the narrow sometimes, some ways. And it's change is difficult. We get used to something and it's just like tomorrow morning is going to be an hour earlier. Tomorrow morning the time change happens again. And we have to get used to this different sleep pattern again. And it's just, one of those things that we have to do, but we don't like it. And but we turn around and we like things the way they are. And so, I mean, even though they claim we'll get an extra hour of sleep tonight, yeah, well, most of us won't, but it'll just be a different time of getting up and being organized, and it'll take our bodies a while to acclimate. But regardless, we get used to things the way they are and doing things the way we do them, and to change is difficult. And this is what the Israelites were having trouble doing. I mean, they were so used to living in their sin that when it was pointed out to them, they couldn't bring about the change that needed to be. And verse 17, therefore thus says the Lord, you have not obeyed me by granting a release. It's just that reminder that God knows what's going on. God knows what's in our hearts. God knows what's in our minds. And he sees what we're doing. And it's so often that we go against God. And the Israelites, I mean, we have this wonderful example in the Bible of how the Israelites were unfaithful, yet God saved a remnant. And God was always faithful to them. We have to, when we do something wrong, we have to accept the punishment. And this is what we're learning, from these stories of these Israelites. And then chapter 35, the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Again, it's that from the Lord, and maybe it's been that way more often than I realize, but he was to invite this certain group of, the Levites, the priests or whatever, who were not to drink any wine, to bring them into the house of the Lord and offer them wine to drink. And he did. He invited this whole clan of people in and offered them wine, and they said, God has said that we are not to drink wine, and we have not done so, and we are not going to do so. And as we read on down through, like the end of this chapter 35, verse 18 and on, it's because this house of these people have obeyed the command of God and done all that he commanded you, therefore, thus says the Lord, they will receive and continue to have a blessing because they listened and they followed what the rules were, what the laws were that way. And then in chapter 36, we have the 4th year of King Jehoiakim, son of Josiah of Judah. So this is, we've got different kings, of different nations. Like there was a king of Judah, there was a, Judah, the Israelites were a divided kingdom, or Israel was a divided kingdom, and King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and, it's just the same as it is today. There are different rulers in the area. But the word comes to take a scroll and to write down these words. So he has Baruch, Jeremiah has Baruch come and write these words down on a scroll. It says they're written with ink on a scroll and then delivered to the priests and to the other people, and they are read and as the people hear them, then they say, well, the priests other people need to hear, higher ups need to hear, and it got taken then to the king. And the king, as he hears this being read, as you read on through the chapter, starting in verse 23, it says, as the king heard a certain amount read, and then he cut it off and he threw it into the fire. It was, the 9th month, so it was a cooler time of the year, and he had a fire burning in his chambers, and he ended up burning the whole scroll. And of course, that did not please God. And so so the king sent word that Jeremiah and Baruch should be arrested, but they had been warned to go and to hide themselves, and they did. And it says that God protected them. They were, but it says in the Bible, but the Lord hid them. And then later on in this chapter, Jeremiah is again told to have Baruch write these words again so that they would be written down. And Baruch, this person that's writing this scroll for Jeremiah, is credited with writing down and collecting most of this book of Jeremiah that we have. He was the scribe, he was whatever, but but he's the one that made sure that we have these words of God for us and for our education, for our, for our guide in how we should live and follow God.